We begin here in Africa, where all political parties in Mali have been dissolved by the country's military junta. This comes amid a growing crackdown on dissent since the army seized power. The decision was validated by the country's military leader, Assimi Goïta, who seized power after coups in 2020 and 2021, and is due to stay in power for at least another 5 years, despite pledge he made to hold elections. The move is expected to spark fresh resistance by political parties, which have been demanding the country returns to democratic rule. Since last year, the military authorities have intensified a crackdown on political activity. The presidential decree read Tuesday evening by the military warned Malians not to ignore the dissolution of political parties, but no penalties was outlined. For an analysis of the leadership of Mali and the political situation there, international law expert and African affairs analyst Livingstone Wichie joins me virtually. Good to have you join us, Mr. Wichie. All political parties in Mali now dissolved. What signal is this sending across Mali as a country, the continent of Africa, and even globally?
Basically, this is the trend whenever you have a junta in place. Nigeria witnessed this process, a very bitter one at that silenced the civic space and shrunk the democratic efforts by those who felt and believed in democratic principles and values. So what you see playing out in Mali is a ripple effect of the resurgence of the unconstitutional change of government. You recall that for the past, between 1950 and now, reports have it that Africa has experienced about 200 coups d'etats, and about 106 of the attempts and the actual coups d'etats have been successful. As such, incidentally, General Goïta of Mali is on his second journey, on his second missionary journey via the coup d'etats between 2020 and then 2021. So this process will continue because in a junta, you don't expect any form of democratic development, particularly in Africa where the civilian administrations and the juntas behave alike, all in a bid to get a message to the people to say, look, we are here to restore democracy. All the factors that coup leaders have hinged the basis for their coup actions on have remained the same. Lack of good governance, corruption, and so on and so forth. So Mali will do even more than this because it's no longer under the supervision or partnership with ECOWAS. It's now in the league of Burkina Faso and Niger in their Sahel States committee, as it were. So the point being made is this. This also reveals that Africa is still going through gross deficits of institutional capacity to ensure the entrenchment of true democracy, where independent states with audacity are still perpetuating themselves in power through unconstitutional means. It goes to show the level of weakness of both our regional and continental bodies, such as ECOWAS and particularly the African Union.
All right.
And if this continues, it also sends a message to the already purportedly existing democratic states that they too can be victim of what is happening in Mali, because other nations have moved on around our counterpart continents, but this is still what Africa is grappling with.
I hear you, Mr. Wichie. Perhaps it's also ironic that sometimes when these coups take place, you find some section of the citizenry rejoicing, celebrating the emergence of the military role. What could be happening? And in this particular case now, considering the continued crackdown on political activity in Mali, do you see political actors there able to actually defend their clamor for return to democratic rule?
It depends on the orientation, because it's more like a civilizational conquest. We are going through a mental, depressive experience in most of these states. And the question to ask is, the government that was toppled, was it actually a democratic government? Was it a democracy? Because a lot of African states have had to find themselves in a situation where they are living by faith. They have given up to faith. So anybody who comes and preaches rescue gives the coloration of a rescue mission. But in this particular circumstance, you have doubts. Why citizens, you have worries. Why citizens will prefer. Yes, there are indications that those who call themselves democratic government were selling out the people. You have rightly seen the breakaway from the colonial French masters, now aiming towards the Russian elements. The question to ask is Russia going to be different? Why can't Africa and African states work out a unique model for their own governance and development instead of always looking towards one Western country or the other for respite or rescue?
All right.
Every country who claims to come to the rescue of an African state has its own vested interests, and none is without interest in the natural resources, which they will always, as it were, sequester through the entrenchment of instability and conflict and armed struggle around the region. So we must work out intentionally our own model for governance without looking up to the West in any way.
All right, and internally now in Mali, perhaps the situation is compounded by that national conference which was organized by the Goita regime but boycotted by leading opposition parties. It held last month, and one of the recommendations it made was naming General Goita as president until 2030. So how do those in the system now, how do you see between those who actually want democracy and those who are probably just following the mob or just going with the government in power because of whatever reasons?
The thing is, you can't leave this struggle to just the citizens of Mali. And what you find playing out in Mali is another Abacha in the making. Because this is just a General Sani Abacha tabulation playing out in Mali. So dissenting voices being silenced by that so-called kangaroo conference that's endorsed, even when Goita has not said so, even if also what has just happened is under his watch and his endorsements. It also calls for solidarity across various African states. Let African democratic groups also lend their voices. I had wished that Africa has so developed that such countries will be brought to isolation. There is a concept that comes to my mind. Why we have not grown to the point where we insist that any state that fails the democratic test will not enjoy the support of its neighboring states, so that we can have a collective commitment towards the type of democracy and governance that works for us. So it calls for statesmen and counterpart democratic voices and civil society groups, not the ones that are sponsored by the Secret Service and espionage groups of the West, but homegrown, genuine, patriotic and conscious African leadership and the democratic groups have to also start speaking up to make what Goita is doing unpopular, because the more it remains in place, the more it gives it a sense of false legitimacy.
All right, Mr. Wichie, perhaps this was, one of the first few steps that the African Union, even ECOWAS, took back then when they, applied sanctions on Mali and some other countries that, where...
It has not been working. It has not been working.
Yes, but you also know the criticism that trailed that, the fact that, this would rather further exclude them and make them feel further away from ECOWAS.
Is not a democratic institution. You can't give what you don't have.
All right, Mr. Wichie, thank you very much. I sincerely appreciate you for your contributions on World Now. International law expert and African affairs analyst, Livingston Wichie. Thank you again for your time.